So, all right, well, let's jump in and see. As you know, we're going through Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's a classic from the Buddhist tradition, and in this Thursday morning class, we're kind of sticking with things that are more the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga. And since Ramakrishna is quoted by Swami Sharadananda in The Great Master as having said that Buddhism and the path of knowledge are the same, I thought this is a very nice. And when I read this book, what a difference it made to my practice. Some wonderful ideas. So, written by a well-known Buddhist monk, Suzuki, Shunryu Suzuki. I hope there's someone that can pronounce it better. But all right. And I can't pretend I don't need these anymore. Here we go. Where did we start? Do you remember, Maya, what the first sentence of the new paragraph is? I got quite a few things marked up here.
If you find some difficulty.
Okay, very good. So I was on the right page. Wonderful. So if you find some difficulty in your practice, is he talking to anybody here? If you find some difficulty in your practice, that is the warning that you have some wrong idea. So you have to be careful. Right. So if practice is if there's something avoidance or something that you don't that isn't going well with your practice, he says, just like any other type of suffering's probably an overstatement, but it certainly could be a certain mental suffering if things aren't going well in your spiritual life. But all trouble is that call to attention. So when something's going wrong in your practice, don't be afraid to make a change. Don't be afraid to play around. We talk about that quite a bit. That your practice is with you and the beloved. If you're a bhakti, that's how God is working with you. Then, play around. Become a little bit more mischievous in your practice. Become a little bit more open. Make a few more beautiful assumptions about grace and divine love. All right, so we're mixing, for those of you, we're mixing bhakti, which is the path of devotion, and jnana, which is the path of knowledge. So quite often I drag in devotional ideas, even though it's a Buddhist text, because it's the same ideal. Both all of the four known paths lead to that realization of one without a second. So all of them are Advaitic in nature, meaning they all arrive at the fullest and highest ideal. I tend to keep bhakti within our purveyance, even if we were strict jnanis, only because it's the opinion of Sri Ramakrishna that the most effective and fastest way to our realization in this day and age is bhakti, the path of devotion. So I try but he's in favor of mixing them. He tells the bhakti to tie Advaita in the corner of his dhoti. Keep yourself informed by one without a second, so that you don't become what do you say? So you don't become a fanatic. And if you're a jnani, keep your bhakti tied in the corner of your dhoti, the idea of God with form, so that you don't become a dry jnani, that you can keep the heart active and alive in your practice. So what he's saying, though, is if you're having difficulty with your practice, there's some wrong idea around it, which is nice. I'm going to mute everyone here if that's all right. Is that working? Oh, yeah. Okay, so he's saying that there's some wrong idea, and the nice thing about that is sometimes in our practice we make ourselves the victim of a bad practice. My mind is so changing, active all the time. I can't focus. I can't concentrate. I'm so dry. It's so dull. Blah blah blah. It's within your power to change that. You know, that you are in charge. And so rearrange the furniture of your mind to be encouraging, to be optimistic, to be hopeful about your practice, and to not feel that dismay. If there's something not right in your practice, change it. If it's dry, then do something like bake the beloved a birthday cake, or offer a flower to the divine, to the universal void, as you like. But do something new, something that wakes up the heart, something that wakes up your sense of adventure, really. Because I think spiritual frontiers are really the last real adventure available to us. Of course, if the depth of the ocean is more interesting to you, then that's one also. But this idea of spiritual knowledge, this really is the final frontier. And a lot of this knowledge is kind of falling out of vogue in some ways, and becoming more difficult, or more easy, actually, with the internet and whatnot, to reach. And so have a sense of adventure, and always be open to growing and to changing the way that you've got thoughts and philosophies arranged in your mind. Because if you're not realized, they're not perfect yet. The understanding isn't there yet. There's something you're still holding that's blocking you, something that's feeding your ego in the way that you're doing things. So if you find some difficulty in your practice, that is the warning that you have some wrong idea. So you have to be careful, but do not give up your practice. That's one of the things that I know my teacher was emphatic about. Do not give up your practice. If you're not in the mood for your practice, maybe change what you're going to do that day. If you just can't get yourself to sit down and meditate, then get down and write a poem, or write an essay for the divine moment, or sing a song, or do some sort of ritual puja. Go for a walking meditation. It's all right to mix things around. The ultimate cure is, of course, self-control. To sit and be able to lose yourself in the work, to be able to understand that all those problems with practice hang in the ego mind, the active mind, that you have an escape hatch within you, if you want to find it, to where you can stand behind the mind that's not happy about practice, or that's spoiled in its intentions and needs, and you cannot be affected by it. And that's the best way, honestly, because that will give you room then to place your awareness on your awareness, to talk in Advaitic terms, to put your eye, the mind's eye, or your inner eye, on that infinite quiet, that infinite stillness that is the real you, just to sit in it, in that atmosphere. When I say put your eye on it, I realize, well, put your attention there. It's one of those things you can't objectify, right, though. So it's sitting in the midst of it, allowing yourself to soak in that oneness. You don't really want to put attribute or thinking about cosmology at that point. You're trying to just sit into real stillness, with the understanding that the nature of that stillness is bliss and wisdom and the experience of being. Here there is no gaining idea. Here there is no fixed idea of attainment. You do not say this is enlightenment, or this is not right practice. Even in wrong practice, when you realize it and continue, there is right practice. Our practice cannot be perfect, but without being discouraged by this, we should continue it. This is the secret of practice. So he says here that, of course, he talks about this quite a bit. It seems to be, and of course is, fundamental to the idea of what we're doing in spiritual practice, that it's not a gaining idea, meaning there's nothing that we're going to get, right? It's called a realization because it's something you already have. Even in this moment, you have your realization. There's not anything major that's going to change about you on the day of that realization, because the realization is, oh, this has always been here. How have I never seen this before? There's many illustrations about that, those weird optical illusions. The one I always use is the one where you have, depending on what you count as negative space, it's either two faces looking at each other or it's a lamp, right? And the first time you see that, you can't see it. You're looking at it, and then suddenly the switch happens, right? And oh, there's the faces. Oh my God. You can never again look at that picture in the same way. You'll never be able to look and see just the lamp or just the faces. You're always going to see them both sort of twitching back and forth as your focus changes. Well, realization has been described in something similar like that. We're sitting here staring at the mind, staring at our reflection in the mind, and we're not able to see the oneness and the multiplicity, which are both there. We can only see the multiplicity, and we count ourselves to be in the multiplicity instead of observing the multiplicity. And so this is what causes our confusion. But realization will be the day when you're staring there at the movement, at the change, at the changing world of mind, and suddenly you see it. You see the underlying unity from which it all emanates, from which it all is manifested. And of course, that something from which it manifests is you, the watcher, the observer, being reflected in pure mind, and then being attached. And the attachment is the gaining idea. That's the problem. See, the attachment that he's talking about, this gaining idea, is that grabbing on to something in your mind with the idea of me in mind. And that's why he says there that even if your practice isn't going well, you do not call it bad practice. You don't label it, because if you label it, you objectify it. You put it in front of you, and you're defining it, giving it a value, suggests your attachment to another value, to a different value from which this is contrasting or being observed. And so it's the reason he doesn't want you to sit there and analyze your practice is because that is egoistic, and that's strengthening the ego. So when we sit there, it's a continual opening. You can call it neti, that idea of not this, not this, not this, or not this is really the same as the Buddhist practice of watching the thought come and letting it fall, but come and fall without having an idea about it, without sitting there and analyzing it, without placing it and letting it remind you of other things that you've attached to and remembered in your mind. Let it rise and let it fall. And by not having an idea about it, by not having an analysis of it, you break the relationship strings. You break this disturbance, the me and mine that causes the mind to vibrate and to be restless. By breaking that habit of my thought or gaining idea, or even the toughest one, or I call it, it's not the toughest one, I guess, but it's one of the most sneaky ways that the mind, that we get lured into it, is when you're having a good practice. And then you recognize within your practice that you're having a good practice. And suddenly everybody knows that experience of good practice disappears, because the thing that made it a good practice was the non-identity, the non-attachment. And when you name it, I'm having a good practice, you have drawn a line between you and the practice, which means you've now become not the thing that you're seeking. You've placed the thing you're seeking in front of you, which means it's no longer real, and you've gotten attached to it. And now it's going to seem like that's the goal, to return to that good practice. And if you've got a goal, you've got a gaining idea. So that's what he's talking about. Be the observer. Find your contentment separate and apart from a good or bad perspective of a meditation. And from that, you'll understand that works with life as well. That you can have a good or bad event going on, and you'll understand the perspective is up to you. good and bad events can lead you to the truth. And so where is the bad event in that? So learn to use all of the conditions to take you toward the divine, or to take you toward that stillness, or to take you toward your realization, or toward the isness of your being. And if you want to find some encouragement in your discouragement, getting tired of practice is itself the encouragement. Okay. That looks like a catch-22 for talking about what we just talked about, that you can find encouragement in your discouragement by using all of the conditions of mind, all of the conditions of the seeming world, as ways of seeing things positively. There are a few axioms. If we go to the Christians, we know that all things work together to good for those that love or love God, and are called. And then they go into that spiel. But that notion that everything works together for good, that's one way that you can use for staring at trouble, staring at problems, staring at struggle, to see and understand that it's working for your best, that there is a divine love, as you will, or a divine bliss, or the structure of the universe is working for your realization. The universe itself is true. It is one without a second. It's you who have declared independence, and that has put a very strange lens over your eyes. And so you see your own world, and we each see a different world, based on what our idea of ourself is, the things we've collected to identify with, the things that we've decided, this is me and this is mine, and on you go. So if you do find discouragement, then find encouragement in your discouragement. The practice is itself the encouragement. You encourage yourself when you get tired of it. When you do not want to do it, that is the warning signal. It is like having a toothache when your teeth are not so good. When you feel some pain in your teeth, you go to the dentist. That is our way. The cause of conflict. All right, so here we go. This is a nugget here. The cause of conflict is some fixed idea or one-sided idea. When everyone knows the value of pure practice, we will have little conflict in our world. This is the secret of our practice and Dogen Zenji's way. Dogen repeats this point in his book, Shobo Genzo, A Treasury of the True Dharma. All right, so conflict is caused by having a fixed idea, two things there, fixed idea or a one-sided idea. A fixed idea is an absolute, and of course, in the world of change, there is no absolute. And so if you grab a changing thing and try and make it absolute, that's where suffering comes in. If you try and hold on to a partner for eternity, there's going to be suffering, because nothing changing is enduring. All changes. There's nothing there to grab onto. That one thing, and this is a slight difference between the perspective of a Vedantist and a certain schools of Buddhism, is that one unchanging thing, is the divine reality. Now, Bhaktis are going to call that God, and they will experience it as God, and it will be true as an experience of God for them. For the Jnani, that will turn into that nirvana, that it's often referred, that emptiness or that void, but it's one without a second. So it can be called anything, and you're going to be wrong. Because it's one without a second means there's not an observer to describe it. It does not have an attribute, or it has all attributes. And that's just a matter of how you want to perceive it. If you're in a good philosophy class, you can fight each other to the tooth if you want, pull each other's hair out, trying to decide, is it full or is it empty? And the perspective, the truth of it is, yes, it is. It is full. Yes, it is empty. And that's why we don't come up with that, what's he say here, the fixed idea or the one-sided idea. Don't imagine that your mind can contain the truth. That's not where it lies. It's transcendent. It's not in your mind. So we don't want a fixed idea, because a fixed idea is not true. It's that detachment into isness, pure being, where there is no attribute, there is no value, there is no right or wrong. There is only isness. And we know that the nature of that isness, to be pure love, to be pure wisdom, to be existence itself. And any one of those three is, beautiful, divinely beautiful. If you understand the cause of conflict as some fixed or one-sided idea, you can find meaning in various practices without being caught by any of them. So that's the thing. It's like you can find the meaning. This is the beautiful thing. And this is really the essence of the Vedanta. That Ramakrishna says that the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, contains all paths, contains all forms of worship, both a divine with form and a divine with no form. And that all of these are beneficial and can be beneficial to your practice. So if you don't take a one-sided idea, you don't say, I'm right and you're wrong about any particular path, but you keep that mind fresh and pliable and open, not to say that you don't believe anything, not to say that you don't commit to anything, quite the opposite. You stick to your path. You be faithful to your path, because there's scaffolding within your path that's necessary for your path, right? So it's a matter of, yes, you sit there and you dig in your one place for water, but you don't go around telling everybody else who's digging in their own places for a well that yours is the only one that's going to get water. Everybody needs to be encouraged in the path that they're following to put their sincerest and most earnest effort into it. And the universe itself, however you want to perceive that, will make the corrections. Ramakrishna says, if you go out your front door and you earnestly want to get to the grocery store, but you don't know where it is, you're going to get to the grocery store, because you're going to ask people, is the grocery store this way? You're going to look around and see, oh, it's probably in that direction. And eventually you get there. So the earnestness, the sincerity, and the practice of truth, which means that inner integrity, those are the three things that we hold on to, within ourselves. Those are the unchanging aspects of the divine, to kind of break another Advaitic principle or Buddhist principle there. But they are the last three, let's put it that way, because there are no qualities in the highest realization. But Satchitananda, that love, wisdom, and existence of being, those are the last three qualities you'll cry out before merging into one without a second. So, that's a way you can marry the ideas of void and one without a second, along with a personal God with attribute. The final three attributes, or the first three attributes to occur as you vibrate or step out of the oneness, is love, wisdom, and isness, being, right? You become a verb at that point. We've mentioned that. Like, the state of total realization is a state of noun, right? There's no changing, no relativity. There's perfect stillness, perfect equanimity. And when you step into the manifest world, you become the verb of that noun, right? And the way that I learned from one of the Christian saints, and her discovery is a French woman, actually. She says that God does not exist, right? Remember this little spiel: God does not exist, but he is existence itself, right? And that existence is what you borrow when you become a verb, when you become manifest. God is not loving, God is love itself. We become the verb of love when we manifest. And that God is not intelligent, but he is intelligence itself, or she or that is intelligence itself. And so we become the verb of intelligence when we manifest. So he's saying here that in all of these various practices, if you don't grab some fixed idea or some one-sided idea, then you can find meaning in various practices without being caught by any of them. Now, it's interesting what he's saying there, without being caught by any of them. You see, practices are not the goal. So we don't want our life to become about the practice. We want our life to become about that which the practice is pointing at, which ultimately is the one without a second, which by philosophical definition would be ourself, right? Would be that which is aware and using this apparatus for that awareness or to manifest that awareness. You know, that this is that thing. So if we attach to any particular thing in practice and make our life about that practice, you get caught, right? You always have to be willing to transcend. And you can see that in Ramakrishna's practice, you know, with his Advaitic experience, when he transcended the ideas of God and whatnot. It's not that God wasn't there. He had visions of God, saw God, spoke with God, played with God. You know, God manifests when you consider yourself separate. And so the bhakti path is not a path of imagination. It is a particular perspective on the reality, and it is real. God is real in that perspective. The unreal part is you. You know, the idea that you're existing separate. And so in this Buddhistic idea, it's that you lay down all of that, attachment, and simply keep your eyes on that, or keep your eyes on nothing, and keep spreading wider and wider in your attention. Awareness becoming aware of awareness itself. If you do not realize this point, you will easily be caught by some particular way, and you will say, this is enlightenment, this is perfect practice, this is our way. The rest of the ways are not perfect. This is the best way. And he says, this is a big mistake. There is no particular way in true practice. You should find your own way, and you should know what kind of practice you have right now. Knowing both the advantages and the disadvantages of some special practice, you can practice that special way without danger. But if you have a one-sided attitude, you will ignore the disadvantage of the practice, emphasizing only its good part. Eventually, you will discover the worst side of the practice and become discouraged when it is too late, right? Not a lot to say about that, really, beyond what it says. Just don't be attached to practice. Don't be attached to your philosophy. Practice it. Trust it. Live accordingly to it. It's not a matter of that. But always know it's not the thing itself. Always know that at the end of the day, the mind is very small compared to the reality. And the mind does not hold the answers. And only a mind identified with ego would ever make you feel like you know the answers, would make you feel I've got this figured out. Because it is not in the mind that this happens. It's in the pure mind, and the pure mind is a still mind. A mind under control, a mind not identified with, right? So he says, if you have a one-sided attitude, you will ignore the disadvantage of the practice, emphasizing only its good part. Eventually, you will discover the worst side of the practice and be discovered when it is too late. This is silly. This is one of Swami Prabhutananda's things, you know. It's like when we start to take things too seriously, when we start taking things that we know a bit too seriously, you know, you have to come to an understanding that that is dumb. You know, Swami Prabhutananda, I mention it a lot because it was quite humorous. He would say quite frequently, why is it that you have not realized yourself? it is because you are dumb. He had a very specific, really resonant way of pronouncing that. It really just kind of thumped you on the chest, right? No, you're dumb. And you understand, you see, it's the ego alone that says I and gives it attribute. And an ego loves religion because an ego can stack all kinds of philosophical bricks together and create a wonderful philosophical castle in the mind that you can be very proud of and that you can sit in and that you will remain deluded and ignorant in until you dismantle it or till you walk out the front door and don't look back. So don't imagine that we're looking for a philosophy, or don't imagine that we're looking for an arrangement of thinking. We're looking for freedom. And freedom means having no desire. Freedom means seeing the moment as it is, which is perfect, content, still, and not needing any change. We should be grateful that the ancient teachers point out this mistake to us. All right, very good. So that's the end of last week's class. Now we'll jump into this week's class. Limiting your activity. All right, this will be interesting. Ramakrishna would have a lot of fun just with that title. Limiting your activity. What exactly is that? If you're not the doer, what activity are we going to limit? So here we go. Usually when someone believes in a particular religion, his attitude becomes more and more a sharp angle pointing away from himself. In our way, the point of the angle is always toward ourself, right? In most, well, the religions that I've looked at, most of them will tell you that the divine is within. Most of them will say, you know, the kingdom of God is within, that thou art that. Ramakrishna constantly telling people to go inward. And, you know, quite often, you know, this is a new realization, or not a realization, a new revelation, let's put it that way, that I went through, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago. This notion of how do you go inward? What does it mean to go inward? And I always used to think that means just dive into your mind, you know, just dive in and think about things. But going inward is turning off the mind and going even beyond mind, you know, which is a real practice, because it's a practice of silence. It's a practice of becoming only a listener, which means becoming only the witness, and letting yourself become aware of everything and nothing at the same time. Nothing meaning no particular, that you just keep opening and opening and opening and opening and listening and listening and listening and extending that silence to which you are listening. And in that itself is Ramakrishna says, all the gem, the richest gem that you are seeking. So in our practice, we have no particular purpose or goal, nor any special object of worship. All right. In this respect, our practice is somewhat different from the usual religious practices. Joshu, a great Chinese Zen master, said, "A clay Buddha cannot cross water. A bronze Buddha cannot get through a furnace. A wooden Buddha cannot get through fire. Whatever it is, if your practice is directed towards some particular object, such as a clay, a bronze, or a wooden Buddha, it will not always work." All right. Now it's important how he says that there, that it won't always work, which means there is a time and a place for the practice of focusing on an image of your divine. Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, they're very insightful in the way that they talk about it. When you do image worship, first of all, there's the understanding that in all traditional pujas or worships, the first thing you do is invite God out of the heart and into the image, right? So image worship is not multi-theism. You know, image worship is seeing the one through an image. It's just giving, because you are accustomed to living in the world of the senses, because you are accustomed to seeing yourself as real, and God is separate, or the divine is separate, or your goal as separate from yourself, while you're in that place, while the world seems that way, it is beneficial to use a practice which helps you focus, because you're constantly aware of your senses and using your senses. It's proper to have a practice that can engage those senses until you start to get a handle, or till you start to get an idea of separateness from mind and body. That until that time, this practice can be helpful. But don't get attached to that practice, because there is going to come a time to let go of it. That's what he's saying. Just like Ramakrishna, when he was having his Advaitic experience, Mother, the Divine Mother, kept appearing to him. And what did he do? He said he took that sword of discrimination in his mind, that discernment, and as difficult as it was for him, because he lived for God as Mother, he thrust that sword through the idea of God with form and went into samadhi for 6 months. Laid there on the ground, the body abandoned, that it had to be forced fed and constantly rolled over to keep from, getting bed sores and whatnot. For 6 months, he was in that state, in that merged one without a second, before he came back down to the body again. So this is that idea. Don't get attached to any particularly manifested path to God. If it's true that the divine is everywhere present and always perfect, then what path are you on and where are you going? If God is everywhere present, always perfect, what path are you on and where are you going? That is the understanding here, right? There is nowhere to go, nowhere to need to go. It's coming to a realization of that being true. And then through that awareness that you've now, not gotten, but uncovered in yourself, you see that everything is as it should be. So as long as you have some particular goal in your practice, that practice will not help you completely. It may help as long as you are directed toward that goal. See? So there is a helpfulness to it. Don't throw things out before it's time. That's a big problem in not just Westerners, actually, it's a big problem with everybody. We get a philosophical idea in our mind, and we like it because it's a high ideal. Advaita is a beautiful philosophy. It is super satisfying to the mind. It's wonderful to sit and talk about and to come to this truth. But as long as you get up in the morning and feel like you have a body that has to be cleaned, a body that has to be dressed, it is not time for you to lay aside the practices for purifying the mind so that this can become evident to you, right? And you can use any of the paths. You don't have to worship an image. You don't have to be a bhakti. You don't have to be a Gyani, you don't have to be a Raji, you don't have to be any of these particular things, but understand, that an open mind is a quiet mind. An open mind is an undisturbed mind, and an undisturbed mind can see things as they are. You may think that if there is no purpose or no goal in our practice, we will not know what to do. But there is a way. The way to practice without having any goal is to limit your activity, or to be concentrated on what you are doing in this moment, right? That's the practice of here and now. And that's that has so many beautiful aspects to the practice of the presence in the terms of the Christians, or the power of now in terms of Eckhart Tolle, or divining the I am. So these things, just understand that to not have a goal does not mean you're not doing anything. It means that you don't have the idea of gaining, but you are present. And your practice, believe it or not, is how to be present. And the humor in that is that you've never been anything else. But the fact is that you're so unconscious of your presence and of your awareness, you've become deluded by the world of thinking. You're not where you are because you're not living In the moment, you're living in your mind. And your mind has set up a sequence of conditions to explain the state that you're in. It's set up a set of perspectives from which you observe your senses, which says, oh, this is a good one, that's a bad one, which is an arbitrary statement always. And you define things in a particular way that cause you problems, which inflict you with desires, which inflicts you with goals, which then keeps you on the wheel of samsara, living within a mind, trying to satisfy a target that is always moving and always changing. And you cannot find your realization there. So until you begin the process of backing out of that world of change that you've created in your own universe, your own mind, right? Because once again, to remind us, we live in a mind, not a universe. And so as long as we sit there and churn in the mind, we can't see the moment. And any time that we're thinking about the moment, we're actually living in the past. Because by the time that moment gets reflected back to your awareness in order to be cognated and discussed, it's a reflection. It's already the past, right? So you have to get rid of the mirror. You have to stop reacting to the mirror, and you have to be becoming the image that's in the mirror. You become your own self, right? Not an idea of self. And that's why they say that these great sages live spontaneous lives, that their isness is their response. There's no cognition, there's no calculation. Oh, I'm going to do this and say this, and it's going to have this effect and do that and get this person here. They're not like that. They're so present, they know. Like Eckhart Tolle points out, the amount of wisdom in a moment of silence is infinitely larger than all that the mind can hold. You know, this wonderful, that's not a direct quote, that's definitely a summary of that idea. But to know that and to be in that. So be concentrated on what you are doing in this moment. Become aware of what your mind is up to. Become aware of what your body is up to. Become aware of all of the senses coming in at once, not any one particular. You know, that's part of our problem. We don't, well, problem and necessity in a way, but in a sense, you pay attention to one part of your senses. You know, it's like if you're hungry, if you're not able to withdraw from that and just make hunger one of the million different sensations coming into your mind at the moment, then hunger becomes a problem. You know, hunger becomes the thing that you attach to that now provides a sense of dissatisfaction, that provides a sense of desire, that creates a sense of future, that keeps you spinning round and round. You know, stay aware of the whole. The mind knows what to do with a hungry body. Let it do it. It's not necessary for you to focus on it and make it a thing. Let it fall in its place. Instead of having some particular object in mind, okay, this is that you are an observer of the general, not the particular. Instead of having some particular object in mind, you should limit your activity. Limit, and by here, what he's saying is limit your attachment to the particulars. Don't grab a thought over another. Don't grab a thought and make it worthy of analysis while you've ignored all of the other thoughts that by those rules would be equally worthy of investigation, right? So you are a view of the whole, a viewer of the one without a second. A viewer of one without a second. There's a thing to meditate about. A viewer of one without a second. And to do that, you can't attach to the particular. It's your ego that creates the particular by taking a stance or a perspective that's unique to itself, that empowers its sense of separateness. Right? When your mind is wandering about elsewhere, you have no chance to express yourself. But if you limit your activity to what you can do just now, in this moment, then you can express fully your true nature, which is the universal Buddha nature. This is our way. That Buddha nature, that manifestation, this is the beautiful thing. And this is why Ramakrishna would encourage a jnani to keep bhakti in his pants pocket, to keep from becoming a dry sadhu. Buddha nature is what? Buddha nature is Satchitananda. That's where compassion comes from. Buddha nature is existence. Buddha nature is an unconditioned love. Buddha nature is wisdom, in those things. All three of them infinite and not definable in an easy word. All of them leading you to emerging oneness without a second. But to understand that that's the goal. If you stop thinking, stop cognating, stop living in an active mind, you don't turn into a piece of wood. What you do is you disable an ego. And when you disable an ego, then that universal nature of love is what manifests. And it doesn't go through the lens of ego anymore, which is a lens of relation. This deserves this much, this deserves this little, this doesn't deserve any. All of those ideals that ego cause. Ego is a refraction. Ego breaks the white light into a million colors, and that becomes the life we get lost in. But if we remain with the knowledge of the white light that contains everything, and that white light being at the very center of this experience of being, therein lies the gem that we're looking for, even though we already have this humor. So limit your activity. So limit the particularity, your attentions on particularities to what you can do just now in this moment. This is very important. Always bring yourself to this moment, especially if you're an anxious person. If you get all caught up in anxiety, bring yourself to this moment. Put all of the things that you're imagining aside. Discern, okay, what is present in this moment? Am I clothed? Am I sheltered? Or if I'm not, just be here now. One of my favorite things that I read from Eckhart Tolle was this notion that there are no problems in the present, there are only obstacles. And they come at you one at a time, because the present is a bottleneck, And so you just take life as it is. And that's the way through all troubles. That's the way through all problems. That's the way, the steady way forward. So be here now, and in that awareness, things solve themselves, right? And once again, I'm reminded Swami Prabhupada, over and over, I remember these things. It is the light of awareness itself that will untie the knots of your delusion, that will untie the knots of Maya. So just learning to be fully present without any attachment to a particular will undo the knots of your delusion, of your ignorance. And this is where that which is obvious becomes apparent, in the words of Swami Tattva. So if you limit your activity to what you can do just now in this moment, then you can fully express your true nature, which is the universal Buddha nature. This is our way. When we practice Zazen, we limit our activity to the smallest extent. Just keeping the right posture and being concentrated on sitting is how we express the universal nature, right? That's a very interesting point of practice. He says earlier in one of the earlier chapters that posture is practice. And I've always had terrible posture in my practice, mostly because I'm mostly a bhakti. So I kind of like to kick my legs up and throw my shoulders back and just have a good time sitting with the beloved. But a good practice is one of discipline, and it's one of listening, one of being aware. And when you sit in your seat for practice, if you are listening, the body will tell you how you should sit. And you can feel the adjustments, to straighten out the backbone, to pull the shoulders back, to pull the chin in a bit, come into that practice. And the reason that he would say that your posture is practice is because that posture is a form of awareness. It's the result of awareness. It's the result of having a listening self instead of a doing self and an attached self. And so this practice is very important, the posture, because it brings you into the moment. You start with listening to your breathing, then you become aware of the tightness in your shoulder. You can go about relaxing that shoulder, then you can bring your shoulder back, and you feel it all, and it gets more and more and more subtle. And it's just another form of practicing awareness, expanding your awareness. Because you have to start with the body. That's your temple to begin with, and you have to expand from there. Just keeping the right posture and being concentrated on sitting is how we express the universal nature. Then we become Buddha, and we express Buddha nature, right? We become Buddha by laying down ourself. Buddha is ourself when we have reached our highest ideal. When we've understood what our nature is, when we understand the reality within, that is when it's allowed to manifest. It's no longer funneled through an impure mind, through an ego. So instead of having some object of worship, we just concentrate on the activity which we do in each moment. When you bow, you should just bow. You're not doing anything else. You're not calculating about how that person's receiving the bow. You're not focusing on whether you're being sincere or not. You're not wondering about what else is going on in the room. You're not wondering about how good your bow is, right? It's an expression of self. It's coming spontaneously through your humility, through an expression of your ideal. We concentrate on the activity we do in the moment. When you bow, you should just bow. When you sit, you should just sit. When you eat, you should just eat. If you do this, the universal nature is there. That being, that isness, your sense of I am comes to the forefront. In Japanese, we call it ichigyozamai, or one act samadhi. Samai or samadhi is concentration. Ichikyo is one practice. So that single-minded concentration. It's not split, There's that that very challenging statement where Holy Mother says it and Thakur taught it, that until you get all of the threads on a needle, all the fibers on a thread pulled together into one point, it won't go through the eye of that needle. So that's what we're doing. Here, one of the practices, the Buddhist practice, is being fully present in the moment. So it's concentrating on the isness of being. In the Vedantic bhakti practice, the devotional practice, that focus, that concentration is developed by focusing on the image of your highest ideal within. So the goal is that single-minded focus and concentration. You can't do the necessary work without mastering that skill. You can't hold a mind at bay if you have not learned to control it. You cannot undo states of mind without learning what the nature of those states of mind are. You can't do away with preferences and aversions until you realize that all of them are thought and thought alone. That the value happens only when it meets the universal self within, that nothing in and of itself is positive or negative. It's perfect as it is, and it's only when it meets ego that it's going to be defined. This is good or this is bad. I think some of you who practice Zazen here may believe in some other religion. I do not mind. Our practice has nothing to do with some particular religious belief. Perfect. How's that for a beautiful statement? And for you, there is no need to hesitate to practice our way, because it has nothing to do with Christianity or Shintoism or Hinduism, right? It is not particular to a religion. Why? Because this is the human condition. This has to do with humanity. It has to do with what and who we are. And the investigation, when it started, was not for a religious truth. The investigation, when it started, was to know who we are. What is this world that we live in? And what is the nature of being? Our practice is for everyone. Usually, when someone believes in a particular religion, his attitude becomes more and more sharp, a sharp angle pointing away from himself, right? You see that in our politics. Our religion and our politics has started to want to control everyone, where everybody's peering over their fence at everybody else's business. And they're coming to the idea that now it's time to make laws for things that don't affect 98% of the people in the world. You know, it's just that egoism. So our way is not like this. In our way, the point of the sharp angle is always toward ourself, right? That's what Divine Mother says. She says, you know, do not see the faults of others, my child. If you want peace, do not see the faults of others, but see your own faults. Turn that eye inward and understand that the faults you're seeing in others exist in you. Because if they were not in you, you could not see them in others, right? The baby knows no thief. The baby's laying there in the crib, the thief comes in and steals all of their diapers, and the baby just sits there kicking at the mobile. He doesn't care, take the diapers. No idea. You know, the baby doesn't even believe his own toes belong to him. So what about the diapers, you know? So have that universal vision. That story of one of the direct disciples sitting and meditating when he was in his begging days, and someone came along and laid a blanket at his feet while he was meditating, and he was glad, but he let it sit there. And he said a short while later, some other person came along and stole the blanket, and he laughed inside. The blanket came, the blanket went. Everything is perfect as it should be. Yeah, so just this non-attached observance of isness. The angle is always toward ourselves, not away from ourselves. So there is no need to worry about the difference between Buddhism and the religion you may believe in. Right? This is this is really a delight. I mean, this, you know, this is a Swami speaking here. This is the ultimate truth. This is what we know. Right? It's not about the practices and the beliefs. It's about being and becoming, an unfolding, you know, a sorting out wrong thought with right thought, higher truth from lower truth. Joshu's statement about the different Buddhas concerns those who direct their practice toward some particular Buddha. One kind of Buddha will not serve your purpose completely. You will have to throw it away sometime, or at least ignore it. But if you understand the secret of our practice, wherever you go, you yourself are boss. No matter what the situation, you cannot neglect Buddha, because you yourself are Buddha. Only this Buddha will help you completely. That divine nature within, as you name it, whatever you name it. All right. Any statements or corrections, challenges, confusions?
It's complete. It's really clear now.
Yes, it is. Yes, beautiful. It is clear. You know, it's straightforward. The problem is not the knowing. You know, you read the 2 pages of almost any of the world's scripture, and you know all you need to know. The work is letting go. You know, the work is letting go. We spend a large part of every day working on our adjectives, what we are, who we are, and we've got an idea of what we want to become. You know, we had quite a few years ago, there was a young man who joined the monastery in San Francisco. He wanted to be a monk, you know, and he was talking to me about whether he should join or not. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, as long as you want to be a monk, you shouldn't join. And he was confused by that. He says, why? What is that? And I said, because being a monk means you're becoming nothing. You're not becoming a monk. You're becoming something that's contrary to the way of truth. That's contrary to freedom. You know, what you're trying to do is to be what you have always been, without interpretation. You know? So this isness is paramount. And all of the religions are perfect tools for helping us in that quest. And so, we figure out what ones are working or seem most effective to us, and we grab and go until our guru teaches us differently. Then we let go and keep going. Let go and keep going. Our major practice is discernment. What is real and what is unreal? And being willing to let go of the unreal, which is the toughest part. That's what takes us our years and years and years and our lifetimes and lifetimes, apparently, is not letting go. If the Divine Mother is true, she says you can have your enlightenment this very moment if you want it. So it's a great understanding to go within and see, what is it that I'm holding on to? What is it that I'm wanting that's preventing me from seeing? That's preventing me from my realization. Go in and listen. You know what you're holding on to. And let your practice be about letting go of what that is. All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yes. Be well,
You-
everyone.
Thank you,
Welcome
Swamiji.
again. Well, surely. Welcome again,
Thank
Nick.
you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
May all be well. And we'll
Thank
meet
you,
again.
Raj.
Farewell.